Eric Weiss was born on March 24, 1874, in Budapest, into a Jewish family already familiar with instability. And when they immigrated to the United States in 1878, settling first in Appleton, Wisconsin, poverty became a constant pressure rather than a phase. His father, Rabbi Meir Samuel Weiss, struggling to keep work, while Eric watched respect evaporate from adults who were supposed to be anchors. As a boy, Eric learned early that weakness invited confinement, financial, social, physical, and he reacted by training his body obsessively, running errands barefoot for strength, practicing contortion in cramped spaces, and reading everything he could find about locks, handcuffs, and restraint. Later recalling that the first time he slipped free from a rope tie, he felt something close to relief rather than pride. "I don't belong inside things." A sentence that would quietly define his entire life. By his teens, he was performing small tricks under the name Eric, the Prince of the Air, humiliating himself in cheap vaudeville shows, swallowing needles, doing card tricks that earned more laughter than applause, and sleeping hungry more often than not. But behind the scenes, he was training with monk-like discipline, strengthening his grip by hanging from beams for minutes at a time, holding his breath underwater until black spots danced at the edges of his vision, timing himself while picking locks blindfolded. And when other boys rested, Eric tested pain tolerance by forcing his wrists into cuffs he couldn't yet open, grinding skin raw until the mechanism finally gave. His devotion bordered on compulsion, driven not by applause, but by fear. Fear of returning to poverty, fear of being powerless, fear of being stuck. And when his father died in 1892, Eric took it as confirmation that life crushed those who couldn't fight confinement, telling a friend, "If you can't get out, you disappear." And shortly after, he reinvented himself completely, renaming himself Harry Houdini after the French magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, not as tribute, but as challenge, believing he would surpass him. The name change wasn't cosmetic. It was armor, because Harry Houdini was stronger, faster, and more ruthless than Eric Weiss. And as he practiced handcuff escapes in basements and police stations that let him try as a joke, he began to notice something unsettling, that danger didn't repel him, it calmed him, that the tighter the restraint, the quieter his mind became. And long before fame arrived, before posters and sold-out halls, Houdini was already locked in a private war with the idea of helplessness itself, a war he was willing to bleed for, night after night, unseen, preparing his body for a world that would soon try very hard to trap him in public. By the late 1890s, Harry Houdini had learned a brutal truth about entertainment. Talent meant nothing without spectacle. And so he stopped begging theaters for stage time and instead began performing in the streets, marching unannounced into police stations across Europe and America, challenging officers to restrain him with their strongest handcuffs, leg irons, and chains, signing statements that he would submit to any device they chose, because he understood that authority was the most convincing prop of all. Crowds gathered as policemen locked him up, some tightening cuffs until his wrists turned purple, others hiding keys or switching restraints mid-performance, and Houdini would step behind a curtain or be locked in a cell, silence stretching just long enough to become uncomfortable before he burst free, raising shackled hands in the air as shock rippled through the room. Once telling a reporter, "People don't come to see magic, they come to see if you'll die," a line that wasn't bravado so much as diagnosis. Fame arrived suddenly around 1900, not because Houdini escaped restraints, but because he escaped humiliation, transforming himself from sideshow novelty into headline material. Newspapers dubbing him the Handcuff King, while he studied every lock he encountered, bribed blacksmiths for blueprints, and carried custom tools sewn into his clothing. Secrets he guarded obsessively, sleeping with handcuffs under his pillow, and rehearsing escapes until muscle memory replaced thought. His acts escalated fast. Straitjackets performed upside down from buildings, suspended high above streets where crowds craned their necks, his body thrashing violently as minutes passed and tension mounted. Houdini later admitting, "If it looks easy, it's useless," because struggle was the product. And with success came money, global tours, and a marriage to Wilhelmina Bess Ronner, who became both assistant and emotional anchor, the only person he trusted fully, insisting she memorize codes and contingency signals in case a trick went wrong. Yet behind the scenes, Houdini's life narrowed rather than expanded, dominated by training, secrecy, and control. His body accumulating injuries he ignored, joints damaged, lungs strained, skin scarred from restraints, because stopping felt more dangerous than pain. And even as he became one of the highest paid entertainers in the world by 1905, adored by millions, Houdini privately believed he was one mistake away from erasure, a belief that drove him to invent ever deadlier illusions, including water escapes where failure meant drowning, pushing himself not because audiences demanded it, but because he needed to prove, again and again, that confinement could never win, unaware that the greatest trap of his life was no longer physical, but psychological, tightening quietly as his fame grew. Everything shifted in 1913, when Houdini's mother, Cecilia Steiner, died suddenly while he was on tour. And for a man who had built his entire identity around escaping loss and control, this was the one confinement he could not pick his way out of. Friends recalling that he collapsed when he received the telegram, and later locked himself in his room for days, repeating, "If there's a way back, I'll find it." A promise that turned into obsession. Desperate to believe death wasn't absolute, Houdini sought out spiritualist mediums, attending seances in secret, hoping someone could truly reach his mother. But instead, he found tricks. The same misdirection, hidden devices, and psychological manipulation he himself used on stage. And the realization enraged him, because it meant people were selling false escape routes from grief. So he declared war, publicly exposing famous mediums, interrupting seances, and testifying against them, once snarling, "If spirits can talk, they don't need liars to translate," turning public opinion sharply against him. This crusade cost him friendships, contracts, and safety, as spiritualists retaliated with threats and smear campaigns, painting him as cruel and closed-minded. But Houdini pushed harder, offering cash rewards to anyone who could produce genuine supernatural proof, rewards that were never claimed. And behind the scenes, he grew more paranoid and exhausted, sleeping poorly, suffering stomach pain, and ignoring injuries because rest felt like surrender. Despite this, he continued performing his most dangerous illusion, the Chinese water torture cell, suspended upside down in a glass tank locked from above, a trick so lethal that Houdini refused to allow anyone else to perform it, rehearsing emergency signals with Bess, and insisting that if he failed to surface in time, she was to smash the glass without hesitation. "Don't wait for applause," he told her. And by October 1926, years of physical abuse had weakened his body, though his reputation for invincibility remained intact, setting the stage for the smallest, stupidest act of human arrogance, to do what chains, locks, and water never could. On October 22, 1926, while resting in his dressing room at McGill University in Montreal, exhausted and already complaining of abdominal pain, Houdini was approached by a group of students who wanted to test a rumor that he could withstand any blow to the stomach if properly braced. And without giving him time to stand or tense, a student named J. Gordon Whitehead struck him repeatedly, punches landing hard, while Houdini winced and waved him off, saying, "Too late. Wait, give me a second." Words that should have ended the encounter, but didn't. Houdini continued performing that night, and for days afterward, refusing medical attention because canceling shows felt more dangerous than pain, his identity too tightly fused to endurance. And as his condition worsened, fever, nausea, stabbing abdominal agony, he dismissed it as strain, traveling on to Detroit, where doctors urged surgery, warnings he ignored until collapse made denial impossible. By the time he was admitted to Grace Hospital, his appendix had ruptured, infections spreading through his abdomen, and on October 31st, 1926, Halloween, Harry Houdini died at age 52. Not drowned, not chained, not locked away, but undone by a moment of pride and a body already worn thin by years of self-imposed punishment. In death, the myths multiplied: poison, curses, spiritualist revenge. But the truth was more tragic. and more human. The man who built a career on proving he could escape anything never learned how to stop, never learned to rest, never learned that some challenges aren't tests to be met. And Bess Houdini, honoring a promise made years earlier, spent the rest of her life attempting to contact him through secret codes they had devised together, waiting for a message that never came, until finally admitting, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man, extinguishing the candle she kept burning for him, a quiet ritual that ended the story the way it had always been destined to end.